Hello chess friends and welcome to Yazarov Chess Channel and welcome back to the Meltwater Champions Chess Tour Finals in 2021. We're now in the round 5 of the super event and we're following now the great match game between the two top grandmasters Magnus Carlsen and Hikaru Nakamura. So it's I think always a special derby when these two guys are playing, especially because of the fact I think that these two players have the biggest fan base all over the world. So when Magnus is playing against Hikaru Nakamura, then it's also a little bit of a duel between chess fans, chess fan bases, because all over the world I see comments Magnus should win, Hikaru Nakamura should win. So as I said, it's something I think whenever these two guys are playing, it's something that the whole chess world is following. So let's check out now one great game from the day 5 between Magnus and Hikaru Nakamura. The first game Magnus Carlsen won with a great endgame technique. Then in the second game Hikaru Nakamura didn't get his win, the game only ended in a draw. So now in game 3 and it was time maybe for Hikaru Nakamura to make something to happen. So let's check out now what happened. I think what was really an incredible game. So here e4 played by Magnus. So we have the e5 by Hikaru, knight to f3, knight to c6, and after bishop to b5 we have the Spanish game, we have the Ruy Lopez on the board. So here after move knight to f6 we have now the Berlin defense, and basically there are two choices here for white. White most of the times will simply castle and it could lead maybe into an open Ruy Lopez after knight to e4, or many times white gets this protection with the move d3, which here Magnus Carlsen played. But now it gives this line, this d3 line, gives black the opportunity to play the move bishop to c5. If he would have castled, then I think here bishop to c5 would be a risky choice because of this tactic knight to e5. Nothing lost immediately, still this is playable for both sides, but I think it's such a line that black doesn't like to play. I think after move d3 really the most popular way here is now bishop to c5. It's playable for both sides. Many times you see also black winning the game. So as I said, the Ruy Lopez and especially the Berlin defense is really one of the best responses in this types of structures. So here after move bishop to c5, here Magnus plays now also the most popular way here, bishop takes c6. We have d takes c6, and here Carlsen played by Magnus, of course knight to e5. I'm pointing out again, we have covered many times the Ruy Lopez game, knight to e5 is not working because of queen to d4 and you lose the piece. So that's why here after move d takes c6, here Magnus Carlsen castles, and now after move bishop to d6 Magnus plays now a very annoying pin bishop to g5, because what black is hoping for is of course to activate the bishop in these types of structures. It's not so easy because of this isolated pawn so far on e5, and because of this bishop's activity. This bishop is perfectly fine. So what white needs to do is also to play competition against the light square bishop of blacks, because white gave up of course in the beginning the light square bishop for a knight. So it's time now to protect your light squares, because when you give up a light square like the light square bishop like this, you have to protect that squares that the bishop covered. So now it means we have to protect the light squares by playing something like h3, b3, knight to d2, maybe here knight to c4. This would be sort of a maneuver or a knight where the position could be fixed of course on light squares. So that's why here it's simply time to regroup for Magnus Carlsen and go into a positional battle. And I think Magnus Carlsen and Anish Giri like to really to play this ideas, simply giving up the bishop for knight, double up the pawn structure, and then hope for the best, try to search for good opportunities with the knights on the board. These two players I think love this kind of positions the most. But I think the huge difference between Magnus Carlsen and maybe Anish Giri, who is really a great player and a great positional player, is Magnus Carlsen's ability to change the dynamic in the game, because here from this positional setup I think Magnus Carlsen will always find a way to create dynamics, to create really a wild position, and he's not scared to play maybe a tactical battle against Hikaru Nakamura, who is really one of the best tacticians now these days. So I think the combination between Magnus Carlsen is sort of a combination, that's what I wanted to say, between maybe Anish Giri and Hikaru Nakamura combined. So I think that's the great strength of the world champion Magnus Carlsen, because he can play tactically the game, he can play the game positionally. And here after move bishop to g5 he's announcing, okay, I'm going to direct duel against you, because many times after move bishop to g5, the bishop can be also kicked away and becomes the object of black's attack. Here after move bishop to h4, queen to e7 was played by Hikaru, although bishop to e6 is many times the most popular way here to proceed, because after move h6 and bishop to h4, you see you don't have any more the square g5 in order to kick away the bishop. And now with these types of ideas, with this setup, black has a comfortable game. Maybe as the long-term plan, black could also go c5 and c4, undoubling the pawn structure, which would be also a nice idea, because if this pawn structure gets finally opened, if the pawn structure gets dynamic, then the bishops are of course perfect here. So that's why here bishop to e6, maybe something like knight to d2, and here even g5 would be an opportunity to simply kick away the bishop, then queen to e7, and even maybe even queenside castling would be a great opportunity. So that's why I think this bishop to g5 ideas are simply sometimes rushed, because now after bishop to g3, black could maybe even try to attack further the king side with h4, h5, h4 ideas. Of course, these ideas could have to be prepared more, but as a long-term plan, this could be also a nice strategical idea for black. So here after move bishop to h4, Hikaru played queen to e7, plays now a flexible queen move, because after bishop to d7 or bishop to e6, black could have then a great flexibility to castle queenside or kingside if necessary. So here knight from b to d2, we have bishop to g4, and now h3, we have now bishop to h5, and now d4 immediately by Magnus Carlsen. This is now a really wild move, because here Magnus Carlsen says, okay, you have stayed so long now with the king in the center, now I'm going to punish you, because the e file could get open, the d file could get open, you have to now make a decision. Because if you play e takes d4, it's not so good because of this tactic. You get simply e5, and the only way to protect somehow this position, you see this is not possible, because after bishop to e5 you get g4, you have to play bishop to g6, and we can simply take knight takes e5. After here something like queen to e5, we can simply play here rook to e1, and you lose simply the tactical battle on the e file. So that's why after move d4, here Hikaru Nakamura realized his problems and simply castled queenside. Now Magnus Carlsen realized that his breakthrough is possible. He can play always on this fork idea. The main goal is of course the move e5. If e takes d4 happens, then e5 is the main tactical goal. So here after move rook to e1, here Hikaru Nakamura makes now, I think, a big mistake. It's really hard to see this all of this now tactics that are present on the board, but queen to e6, that Hikaru Nakamura is not so good, because a better idea here is to play something like king to b8, and Magnus Carlsen's idea was to play here c4 and then maybe get the maybe d5 pawn breakthrough. But now after a potential c4 move, here bishop to f3 solves, I think, all of the positional problems. After move queen to f3, then you have this one, bishop to b4, pinning the knight, and I think black has a solid position. The engine gives here already plus 1.5 position for black. So this is something that Hikaru missed. A calm move is sometimes even the best moves in chess, but here Hikaru Nakamura, a sharp attacker, a sharp tactician, he likes to complicate things. And now with the move queen to e6, the queen gets a little bit also exposed, and still Hikaru Nakamura hasn't solved all of the tactical problems on the e file, hasn't solved now the endangered queen position. That's why Magnus Carlsen uses now this moment immediately and plays now a tricky move, c4. c4 is such a brilliant and perfect idea here by Magnus Carlsen, and I wanted to point you out, these players are playing these games in fast time format, seeing a move like c4 and preparing such a great tactic here by Magnus Carlsen. It's simply world champion material. That's, I think, why I mentioned that why is Magnus Carlsen a combination between Hikaru Nakamura and Anish Giri, because with the move c4, Magnus is announcing here really a dynamic game. And after move c4, Hikaru fell for this because he played bishop to f3, knight to f3, and he realized that he could maybe take here the knight on the pawn on c4. But that's actually what Magnus was hoping for, because now the game becomes really wild. D takes e5, we have bishop to e5. If you try bishop to b4, this wasn't played in the game, but actually this move is not bringing anything. It's an intermezzo, the queen is attacked, but now with queen to a4, you can solve now all of the positional problems. The rook cannot be taken because of the pin. You can maybe try something like queen to b5 takes, and then after here e takes f6, you can take the rook. But now after f takes g7, again one rook is hanging, so this is now completely winning endgame here for white. So this bishop to b4 is simply not working. So that's why after d takes e5, Hikaru Nakamura played bishop to e5. Here knight to e5 by Magnus. He's attacking also the queen, and here Hikaru plays queen to b5 because he has to play the move queen to b5 in order to keep somehow his chances in the game. All of the other moves are simply losing. Whatever you do, if you play something like queen to e6, then knight to d3. So you're not supposed to allow here your opponent the retreat here to d3. So that's why you have to stay here with the queen on this diagonal where the knight cannot retreat to d3. Now if that happens, of course the rook and queen are protecting the square. So that's why after move queen to b5, here the knight to c6 played by Magnus Carlsen, really brilliant move, because if you take now the queen immediately, you get the fork. So that's why I meant that Magnus Carlsen is really a great tactician. He calculated everything. Believe me when I say it, he knows his stuff. He knew that this position will reach this kind of structure. So this wasn't played in the game, but you see now what happens if you play, for instance, rook takes d1. So that's why Hikaru realized now his tactical problems, played queen to c6, and now Magnus gets out of the tactical mess. The problem is now you cannot even play knight takes e4. This is not a problem because you get simply here here's some ideas. So queen takes f7, rook to c1 are also opportunity to simply deflect the queen from the defense of the knight. So taking out the pawn is also not an opportunity. Bishop to d8, even if you prepare this move with some ideas like g5, bishop to g3, knight to e4 is simply not working because of rook to c1, and you see now even you're losing the battle here on the c file. So that's why here after move queen to c6, Magnus played queen to b3. So there's simply no time for taking out this pawn, and I'm sure that Magnus Carlsen saw also this particular continuation. After move queen to b3, we have rook to d7, rook to c1 by Hikaru, and now queen to e6. Although probably the only way maybe to get something out of this position is to play queen to b6. At least you're not creating further weaknesses. I think now queen to e6 was a slight inaccuracy here by Hikaru. Magnus accepts the challenge, takes out simply the queen, f takes e6, and now we have reached the endgame stage in which the material is equal, but it's a much better position for white as we have pawns on opposite on both sides on the board. So bishops love these types of endgames where the pawns are on one side and on the other side of the board. So that's why slightly advantage here for Magnus Carlsen. With f3 the pawn structure can be fixed, bishop to f2 can be played, so the bishop will be included into the attack, and it's simply now time here for white to use the pawn majority on the king side by playing 4 versus 3 here on the king side. That's now the main strategical goal in this particular endgame from white's perspective. Of course black has to do the same, has also to play on the pawn majority on the queen side, 3 versus 2, but that's why the bishop is better, because you see when the attacks are on both sides, then the long range piece like the bishop can attack both sides on the board. So that's why in these types of ideas, when the position is stretched, then the bishop is much better than the knight. So really brilliant techniques here by the world champion. So here bishop to g3, b6, rook to c6, very important move, never allowed this progress of blacks. We have rook to e8, bishop to e5 attacking the knight. We have a rook king to b7 protecting the rook, of course, and now here Hikaru Nakamura is also protecting his 7 rank. We have now f3 fixing the pawn structure, of course, getting first all of the pieces on the natural squares and fixing every pawn on the board. We have knight to e8, h4, h5, king to h2. Now the king has to also play in an endgame, rook to c2, rook takes c2, and rook takes c2. Here Magnus Carlsen is saying, okay, we can even trade off more pieces because I have the better bishop. The bishop is better here against the knight. Even if you want to trade another rook, we can do that because the king is also much closer to the action. First of all, we should notice also the g6 is a long-term weakness. So we have rook to f7, b4, now a4. Simply b5 is a great move, which is paralyzing a little bit black's potential progress on the queen side. This is now very important to stop your opponent's progress on that side where he's better and try to make progress, of course, where you are better. So that's why I liked first this idea by Magnus Carlsen to fix a little bit the queen side, and now there's now I think a great idea with king to f4 and then king to g5. So king to c8, rook to a2, we have king to d7, rook to a8, rook to f7. Now Magnus is searching for the best opportunities. We have bishop takes d6, we have king to d6, rook to d1, and here king to e7. You don't want to play, of course, here because you get this one. You can maybe take, but in this potential endgame, I think white is slightly better because we have now many pawn islands. These are weaknesses. On the other hand, Magnus Carlsen has only one pawn island, so it's much easier now for Magnus to protect his pawns because the only weak pawn would be then maybe the backward pawn here, the last pawn in the pawn chain, the pawn on g2. On the other hand, black's pawns are all weaknesses, e6, g6, and also here the b6 are object of white's attack. So that's why this wouldn't be maybe the best continuation. Here after move rook to d1, king to e7, king to e3, rook to a8, rook to c1. Again, Hikaru is protecting, and now g4. Here rook to a3. What Hikaru is hoping for, of course, that Magnus leaves the protection of this pawn, but here Magnus plays a calm move, rook to f1, king to e7. We have now king to g5, and now king to h6. Magnus plays first with the king on the best square, and now a brilliant move, g5, rook to d3. If you go after this pawn, it's not such a good idea because again with rook to d1 and then rook to d7, we will simply take out this pawn. And again, I'm pointing out in this potential endgame, white is much closer to potential promotion. So you see, if black even takes, still let's count it, maybe 1 tempo, 2 tempi, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's in an optimal case. On the other hand, here 6, 7, as I said, 6, 7 tempi, black is needs here in order to make some kind of progress. On the other hand, with 1 tempo, then 2 tempo, 3 tempi, white is already faster, I think, when it comes to this attack. So here after move g5, here we have rook to d3, we have rook to c1, we have rook to d7, rook to c6. Again, Magnus Carlsen is paralyzing the queen side, which is now a brilliant move again. Great endgame technique by the world champion. King to e7, and now simple f4, f5, g takes f5, e takes f5. We have e takes f5, and now rook to f6. Magnus Carlsen has split the pawn chain, and it's now completely winning endgame. We have here c6 by Hikaru, b takes c6. Okay, but these two pawns are connected. The strategy that Magnus Carlsen has created here is to build 2 connected pass pawns, which are of course unstoppable now for the rook. So here after move rook to g5 was played, king to g5, rook to b8, h5, b5, and now in this position after h6, in this position Hikaru Nakamura resigned. So what's the point? There is always this threat. Let's see possible continuations. If you play something like rook to b7, rook to d5 is now the main threat. You have to protect your back rank, and even if you try to do that, then of course we have here h7, then you have to play king to g7, but again you get the check. And here after king to h6, even if you protect maybe your 6th rank, even if you stop white's progress here with the move g7, then of course you get again the checkmate on the back rank. So brilliant game by Magnus Carlsen, especially with this knight maneuver where he realized this tactics. I'm sure, as I said, that Magnus Carlsen saw everything. I'm pretty much sure that he saw his tactics. Brilliant game, as I said, and he's now the leader in this tournament. Congratulations to Magnus. If Magnus continues to play like this, I'm not sure who's going to catch up with him, because he can maybe lose one game, but other players are also losing their games. Magnus is winning many games, so that's why he's the leader of the tournament. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed the game. I really enjoyed it a lot. Interesting ideas of the Rui Lopez. If you want to see more games from this tournament, check out my coverage so far with some other great games that we have analyzed before. And if you want to see maybe top engines battling it out in their best chess games, check out my commented chess games played by computer series with some great games played by Stockfish, Alpha Zero, Lila Zero, and many more. And if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.